for us. I have to thank them. I really thank you publicly for all that you do. Now, Chris and I are going to row every other day, but it's okay. We're still friends. But Jane hold one of those cards for me. Those note cards over there, Jane also did them so that the museum could make some extra money. So tonight she's doing a book signing, but if you don't have enough to buy the book, we ask you to look at those and buy some of those. She has a bit of history written on the back, and they're really well done. A great memento of the IODE. And so without further ado, I'm going to introduce Jane. And I know she's so excited tonight, she can't wait. How many of you saw the article in the newspaper? It was excellent. I thought it was really good. And she decided she would do it here so that we could get some publicity, and that was very good. Jane Lloyd, born in Rockdale, Lancashire, England, was formerly with the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, London, and the British High Commission, Nassau, where she was the commercial officer responsible for promoting trade between the UK and the Bahamas. Jane has lived in the Bahamas for the past 25 years, where she is married to Christopher Lloyd, Operations Manager for the Bahamas Essie Rescue Association. They live in Nassau with their border collie, Salty. Okay. So please, let's welcome Jane. As I said, I don't want to take up too much time with anything else. She has asked that immediately following the talk, she needs to sign some books for some people who may have to leave. So we'll do the questions and answers when you speak with her, or perhaps a little later. So please, let's welcome Jane Lloyd. And she will be with us. All the boys.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming, and thank you to the Historical Society for inviting me to make this presentation. Okay. The idea for this book came about back in 2013, when Jim Lawler, then President of the Historical Society, asked me if I could go through all the IODE records which were kept in the little room at the back there, and which hadn't seen a lot of daylight in many years. This started a wonderful journey which kept me busy for the next 3 years. Of course, it wasn't exactly a good start when I couldn't even get into the cabinet containing all the records, and I don't think anyone had seen a key for some 50 years or so. Thankfully, with the help of a willing husband and his trusty screwdriver, we were able to unlock all the fascinating history that lay within. For my part, I had been the last ever president of the IODE Bahamas from 2003 to 2005, and had become a member of the order in 1992. Back in England, I had been the treasurer of the fundraising committee for Dr. Bernardo's children's homes, so when I came to live here, I was happy to join the IODE when I saw the good work they did and how many charities they assisted. As I started to sift through all the documents which had been meticulously kept by IODE secretaries since 1901, I realised how important it was to make sure some sort of permanent record was made of all their charitable work during their 104-year history. At first, I started to scan all the documents, which I knew would not survive very much longer, and then I realised I should actually try and turn it into a book, which would remain a lasting tribute and show all the work carried out by these women, which included, amongst others, the formation of the Bahamas Red Cross Society, administering the Earl Haig Poppy Fund, maintaining the Royal Air Force Cemetery, and financially helping so many organisations, as well as providing scholarships. To give you a brief history of the IODE, the organisation was actually started in Canada in 1900 by Mrs. Margaret Murray of Scotland. She had married Professor Clark Murray, and they moved to Canada, where he took up a posting at McGill University. On a return visit to England, Mrs. Murray became concerned at the lack of knowledge the women back in England had of just what was happening in the Western world, and was determined, once she returned to Canada, to do something about it. At that time, the war in South Africa was raging, and Canadian troops were fighting alongside British troops. Mrs. Murray realised there was a need for an efficient organisation of women and she therefore set out to foster a bond between the women of the empire with the emphasis on patriotism, loyalty and service. Initially, she had hoped to call the order the Federation of the Daughters of the Empire, but at the time there also existed the Victoria League in England, who had members, both men and women, in Australia and New Zealand, as well as the Guild of Loyal Women in South Africa, and all held similar objectives and were unwilling to change their name. So Mrs. Murray decided upon the name Imperial Order Daughters of the Empire, and the first chapter was formed in Fredericton, New Brunswick, a stronghold of the Empire Loyalists whose forebears had gone to the maritime provinces after the revolution of the American colonies. The organisation was also open to those Empire Loyalists who had gone to the United States of America, and one of these women just happened to be a Bahamian lady, a Miss Anne Adderley. Miss Adderley had married Professor Fritz Sumercrast of Harvard University, and they were friends of Mrs. Murray, who suggested they try and recruit members in the US and the Bahamas. On her return to Nassau, Mrs. Sumercrast was able to convince some of her friends that there was a need for such a women's organisation here in the Bahamas. And so Lady Malcolm, Mrs. J.H. Young, and Mrs. T.H.C. Lofthouse consented to form chapters. Miss Mary Moseley also asked Mrs. Murray to write to the Governor of the Bahamas, Sir Gilbert Thomas Carter, to ask for his cooperation in forming such an order. His daughter, Barbara Carter, was full of enthusiasm and arranged for a meeting to take place at Government House, where the idea was approved, and within a few short years, several chapters were fully operational. In 1909, the Daughters of the British Empire in the United States was established, and in 1920 it became known as the National Society of the British Empire in the USA Incorporated. As well as the Bahamas, a chapter was also formed in Bermuda, and the two colonial branches initially worked under the IODE headquarters in Canada. The first general meeting of the IODE Bahamas took place on the 23rd of May 1901 and was held in St Andrew's Hall, where members of the Queen Victoria, the Gordon and the King Edward VII chapters attended to hear the aims and objectives of the IODE explained. Later, a chapter of 10 young girls was formed, which became the Queen Alexandra chapter, and soon afterwards the Duke of Albemarle chapter was formed in Governor's Harbour, and the Lord Dunmore chapter at Harbour Island. In the early days, there were also two chapters of the Children of the Empire, called the Prince Edward and the Columbus chapters, and one of the earliest child members was Mr. Jack Burnside. For the next 11 years, the IODE Bahamas worked under the jurisdiction of the IODE in Canada until 1912, when Canada granted them a charter as a national chapter. Its effect was to give the IODE Bahamas full responsibility for carrying out its programme as it saw fit, although it continued to be modelled on the founding body in Canada. All of the original charters are displayed on the back wall of the stage. The IODE badge is the emblem of membership. The 7 points of the star represent the principal countries of the Commonwealth: the British Isles, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, India, the islands of the West Indies, and republics of Africa in the Commonwealth. The 3 crosses of the Union Jack indicate red for sacrifice, white for unity, and blue for loyalty.
Some of you don't know, but there are photos to go along with some of the texts that are up on the board up there. For example, the flag right there.
Thank you. And you were brought him along for something. Any member who had a son serving in the First World War also wore the badge I'm wearing now, with 1914, in honour of a son who was serving during the First World War. The IODE Bahamas Constitution stated the objects of the order were to promote education of all kinds, to care for the widows, orphans and dependents of United Kingdom and Commonwealth servicemen during war, in times of peace, in sickness, accident or reverse of fortune, to assist in the relief of those in poverty or distress, irrespective of race, colour, creed or sex, to assist in the progress of the arts, and to give donations for charitable purposes. Membership was open to any woman over the age of 18 who was a citizen of the United Kingdom or Commonwealth and who would affirm her allegiance to the sovereign and be governed by the constitution of the order. The first work to be undertaken by the IODE Bahamas was in 1901, when the members voted to collect subscriptions for the Queen Victoria Memorial in Rawson Square. On May 23, 1902, a pink tea was organised in order to raise funds for the memorial. These pink teas were to feature throughout the early years of the IODE and were historically referred to as meetings whereby women could gather to discuss women's rights, since the meetings would often be decked out with pink decorations, and husbands would be happy for their wives to attend such frivolous teas, unaware of their political content. I've had a few pink teas. Queen Victoria's statue was finally unveiled in Rawson Square on Empire Day, 24th of May 1905. It was made from Carrara marble and sculpted by John Adams Acton of London. The IODE then went on to plant the first avenue of royal palms in Nassau and Culmer Street, which was later renamed Victoria Avenue, and they provided 3 water troughs for the horses which pulled the fringed topsails around the city. The oldest trough was located at the northwest corner of the Eastern Parade. The 3 troughs cost the IODE some £44 British and left them in debt by just over 14 shillings. Civic and educational work was undertaken by all chapters of the order. They provided the Board of Education with school supplies, and following every hurricane, clothing and other relief supplies were immediately dispatched to those in need, and they soon formed their own hurricane relief fund. At the outbreak of the First World War in 1914, the IODE plunged themselves into war relief service, working under the Geneva Red Cross Convention, and they ran a sailors' canteen in the Alpha Hotel on Frederick Street. They worked hard to make garments to send, not only to servicemen back in England, but also to the Bahamas contingent of the British West India Regiment. The first volunteers to leave the Bahamas on 1st of September 1915 were known as the Gallant 30 and were followed in November 1915 by a contingent of 105 men, and a third contingent of 87 men left the Bahamas in May 1916. They arranged for supplies and Christmas presents to be sent to every soldier from the Bahamas and raise funds on behalf of the Red Cross. The IODE Canada provided them with instructions for knitting field comforts for the troops, and up to 1916 members had made over 2,000 chest protectors, caps, rifle knits, mufflers, socks and other necessary garments for the soldiers. Miss Mary Moseley was very active during this time and worked with the British West India Committee in London. She was awarded the British Empire Medal for her wartime efforts and would later to go on to be one of the founding members of the Bahamas branch of the Red Cross Society. After the war, the IODE continued to operate a canteen for sailors from visiting naval vessels and provided much-needed support for those in need throughout the Bahamas. In 1921, when the founding of the Earl Hay Poppy Fund Appeal was established in England, the IODE became the official representatives of the fund in the Bahamas. They arranged for the selling of poppies throughout the country, and over the years many thousands of pounds were sent to the Royal British Legion. The book explains the story behind the poppy and how it came to be recognised as the flower of remembrance. In 1963, following an editorial in the Tribune regarding the ex-servicemen of the Bahamas and why some of them were not receiving any assistance, the matter was discussed in length by the IODE as to whether the money raised should continue to be sent back to England or be retained in Nassau for the benefit of those veterans who needed support. As a result, the IODE voted to keep the funds here, and they received the necessary authorisation from London to donate the monies to the Bahamas branch of the Royal British Legion. IODE members continued to raise funds and sell poppies right up until they disbanded in 2005. In 1937, a committee was officially formed for their headquarters building fund. For many years, the IODE had held their meetings in members' homes, St Andrew's Hall, the Masonic Lodge or local hotels, and they felt the time was right to build their own hall. To commemorate the coronation of King George VI and Queen Elizabeth, members inaugurated the IODE Coronation Building Fund and elected Mrs. R.G. Collins its chairwoman, and membership dues were increased to 4 shillings to help with the fund. At that time, the total number of IODE members would have been approximately 75. In 1939, Mrs. Collins advised members that a piece of land had been acquired at the corner of Union, now Elizabeth Avenue, and Shirley Street, known as the Weech property, for £1,350, and a drawing was made by Mr. William Castle of the proposed IODE hall. Due to the outbreak of the Second World War in 1939, all fundraising efforts for the new headquarters were put on hold as the IODE once more concentrated on war relief work. They opened a permanent canteen in the Masonic Hall on Bay Street, which was kindly lent to the order by the Royal Victoria Lodge. Here they took care of the first troops arriving in Nassau, survivors from torpedoed ships, the Royal Air Force, and men from the American and Canadian services. Many of the IODE members were also on duty at the United Services Canteen and the Canadian YMCA at the RAF base, and all of this was full-time voluntary work for the IODE. At this time, there was a strong feeling among members that a greater effort was needed on their part, and it was therefore decided to widen the scope of their work by forming a branch of the British Red Cross in Nassau. The Governor's wife, Lady Dundas, as Honorary President of the IODE Bahamas, was asked to apply to the British Red Cross Society for the necessary permission, which was readily granted. Lady Dundas offered the use of the Government House ballroom for this purpose and for other war work. The necessary warrants were received, and in 1939 the Bahamas Red Cross was up and running, with the Canadian Red Cross supplying all equipment free of charge, and its transportation to and from the Bahamas was taken care of by the IODE. In all of the work